Hey everyone, how's it going? Greetings and salutations. Welcome to New Science News, all the news that's fit to new from ScienceDaily.com. And I'm Dave, and I'm coming at you from the glorious beauty of space and other places to share this news with you. So let's get to it. Let's look at the first story. And a molecule is shown to produce cognitive improvement in rodents with early Alzheimer's disease. And this is from the University of the Basque Country, which I'm going to assume is in Spain. Scientists have come up with a drug that is a potential candidate for tackling memory deficits in the early stages of the disease in rodents. Research shows that the drug activates the cannabinoid neurotransmitter system, which protects the brain, and this stimulates the cholinergic system. Let's try that again. Cholinergic system, which controls memory and learning, by increasing the synthesis of acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter in the brain that controls memory and learning. These results open up a promising therapeutic approach, and that's exciting. I think anything that deals with this terrible, terrible disease is good news. It's interesting. It connects with the cannabinoid receptors in the brain, hard to say, and those are actually related to cannabis. So we have receptors in our brain which do actually receive the chemical THC, and it's not an entirely well understood system, but this is something that connects to it. Now let's move on to the next story. And what are we going to talk about next? Saliva activates coagulation in persons with hemophilia A. Study provides new insights into the mechanisms of blood coagulation. This is from the Medical University of Vienna. A recent study shows new insights into the mechanisms of coagulation in a person with hemophilia A, the most common form of hemophilia. The research team was able to show that saliva contains special vesicles that trigger rapid coagulation of the blood of hemophilic patients. And that's something really interesting because do you know what animals do? They lick their wounds. And I have to wonder, is there something that is actually connecting to the coagulation, the stopping of the bleeding there? Because we always figure there's antibacterial stuff in saliva and it helps with that. But again, licking your wounds, more than just a thing to do, perhaps a medical procedure. And speaking of medical procedures, this has nothing to do with them. Atop the Oregon Cascades, teams find a huge, let's try that again. One team finds a huge buried aquifer, University of Oregon. Scientists have mapped the amount of water stored beneath volcanic rocks at the crest of the central Oregon Cascades and found an aquifer many times larger than previously estimated, at least 81 cubic kilometers. And just to put that in perspective, that puts it on the level of Great Lakes in terms of the volume of water. The finding has implications for the way scientists and policymakers think about water in the region, an increasingly urgent issue across the western United States as climate change reduces snowpack, intensifies drought, and strains limited resources. So, interesting. A water source mapped is more than we thought. This is not an entirely good news story because it would appear that large amounts of water in volcanic rocks, in volcanically active areas, which the Cascade Mountains of Oregon certainly are, can lead to more violent and catastrophic volcanic eruptions. So, are we looking at a Mount St. Helens times 100 coming up there? Or are we just looking at a new way of feeding those farms in California with the water that they need? So, good news story, scary story, a little bit of both all wrapped up in one. And that's kind of a lot of science for you. There's good news and bad news in the same story. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so, as Shakespeare might say. Now, what's the next story all about? The next story is going to be all about eating red meat. I'm sorry for picking on red meat. It's not me, it's the scientists. Is eating more red meat bad for your brain? Spoiler alert, yes, it is. Processed red meat linked to increased risk of dementia. American Academy of Neurology. People who eat more red meat, especially processed red meat like bacon, sausage, and bologna, or bologna, are more likely to have a higher risk of cognitive decline and dementia when compared to those who eat very little red meat, according to a new study. And that's something that's maybe a little depressing. I mean, I love bacon as much as, or perhaps more than the next guy, but we really have to start thinking about cutting down on the amount of red meat we eat. It would appear that that is what the research is telling us in many different ways. And I'm not saying don't eat it at all, but let's limit it. And let's remember that our ancient ancestors didn't eat red meat every day. They had a more balanced diet. And there were days where they didn't eat red meat at all. And we might want to think to emulate that ourselves for our health. And speaking of our health, what's the next story? That's right, it has nothing to do with our health, but it does have something to do with the health of the planet. Floating solar panels could provide support for U.S. energy goals. New study shows federally controlled reservoirs could host enough energy to power approximately 100 million U.S. homes a year. That's from the Department of Energy, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Well, of course it would be from those guys. Just kidding. Federal reservoirs could help meet the country's solar energy needs, according to a new study. Geospatial scientists and senior legal and regulatory analysts quantify exactly how much energy could be generated from floating solar panel projects installed on federally owned or regulated reservoirs. And what's the interesting deal here? Well, the interesting deal here is this is not land they have to appropriate. They have the space available to them. They can meet a need. They can actually use the solar panels to provide energy to pump the water around in the reservoir, which is something that needs often to be done in reservoirs. And the last and perhaps most important benefit of this is, in addition to the energy generated, those solar panels will shade the water, keep it cooler, and limit evaporation, which is a huge problem in these big reservoirs that are sitting in the middle of dry deserts. So if that doesn't sound like a win, 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 and let's just throw a few more wins in there, I don't know what is. Good news story, solar panels on reservoirs. Let's do this, people. And let's look at our last story. That was our last story. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed New Science News for another week, and I'll see you soon. Let's keep looking for the new, and I will keep looking for a better sign off line. Peace!